Crucible Theatre, it's been home to the World Championships for over 47 years, and there is now talks of it moving to Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about it in this video. Is it worth moving? What's going to happen? And what is the answer to moving the World Championships?
On my tombstone will not be written, "This is the man who took the World Championships away from the Crucible." It's staying, and it don't matter how much is involved. And I have never said that once in my entire life. Great days, mate. Great days.
Yes, huge news, guys. Now, obviously, this is a slightly different video to what is usually on this channel. We're going to talk everything about the Crucible. It's a massive talking about, especially over on Twitter or X at the moment, about whether snooker should leave the Crucible and obviously whether the World Championships should stay in Sheffield or whether it should be moved to Saudi Arabia, which is the most likely candidate. It's a sad day. I've been to the Crucible 3 times. I'm going this year for the semi-finals. And before we make any judgments as to whether it is going to be moving or isn't going to be moving and what the future of snooker holds, let's just remind ourselves of how important the Crucible is to snooker. Now, we know, of course, the Crucible Theatre, it's been the home of snooker and the home of the World Championship since 1977. It's produced some of the greatest moments in snooker history. We had the Ronnie 147 there, the 5-minute 147. We had the 1985 final that went down to the final black against Steve Davis, Dennis Taylor. We had Alex Higgins calling for his baby after he won the 1982 final. Just some absolutely phenomenal memories that I'm sure, most of you guys will remember. If you're old enough to remember those, of course, you've seen clips in there of these moments. But is it a sustainable venue? Now, we know how much the world is changing, how much the world of sport is changing. Is the Crucible Theatre really a viable place for the World Championships? It's only got 980 seats. It's not a lot of people. And some would argue, and I would argue as well, that is the reason that makes it so special. There's no other venue like it. The intimacy of the venue, you just can't replicate that anywhere else. And obviously moving it to Saudi Arabia would change that. We know that, more tickets are on demand than ever before. They're saying that they could sell out the Crucible 3 or 4 times over, which I completely believe. And, but this place is so special to so many fans of snooker. If you've been lucky enough to go to the Crucible, you'll know how special this venue really is. So this all kicked off a couple of days ago when Barry Hearn gave an interview on the BBC about basically what's going to be happening with the future of the World Championships. And he basically, if you haven't seen it, said that he is doing everything he can to make it stay in Sheffield. And he's kind of famous for saying that he won't let it move from Sheffield before he dies, which obviously seems to be changing a little bit now. And with the right price, anything can be bought. And I think that that's what's happening now. But he kind of implied that basically now it's up to Sheffield Council. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true, whether he's kind of now trying to shift the blame onto Sheffield City Council. We'll have to see. But he basically wants a venue, and he basically wants Sheffield City Council to make a venue for 2,500 or 3,000 people, and basically saying that it's not really his call anymore. I do... If you've seen the interview, if you detach emotion from the interview just for a minute, you can see what he's saying, and I do understand what he's saying, and I am trying to play devil's advocate a little bit here. Of course, we all are so connected to the Crucible Theatre and the World Championships, but sport is changing, the world is changing. We do need something different, and I do feel like that... I don't want the Crucible to change as it is. Of course not. The history that it's steeped in, everything that it's got there is wonderful. But, if the prize money wants to increase, if the sport wants to evolve, if you keep doing the same thing for 50 years over and over, it's only going to stay in a similar position. So obviously the ideal situation would be that Sheffield build a new Crucible with 2,500 to 3,000 people. Whether that will happen, it's unlikely, and I think that's why Barry Hearn is kind of using that almost as an excuse to then be able to shift the blame to Sheffield Council for it to eventually leave Sheffield. But it is a changing world, and that is fair enough. I think some of the comments that Barry Hearn said are fair. He's a businessman, and he's a proven good businessman. He's taken snooker from strength to strength over the the course of the time that he's been managing it. But obviously, it would be a huge shame to see the Crucible moved away from Sheffield. So there's a for and against argument for this, of course. Why should it stay in Sheffield? Well, it's regarded as the home of snooker. If you say snooker to any non-snooker fan, they probably most likely, especially if they live in the UK, heard of the Crucible, and it just produces an atmosphere like nowhere else in the world. Genuinely, I mean, I've not been to every snooker venue in the world, of course, but the snooker venues that I have been to and the competitions that I've visited, I've been to quite a few now. I've been to 6 or 7 different competitions, and the Crucible Theatre, it's like nothing else. Honestly, it really is. And even like big players, they crumble under that kind of Crucible pressure that you just don't get anywhere else. And of course, we've got to look at the argument as well as to why it should be moved. Now, yes, of course, it's a little bit old now. If you've been, the kind of seats are not quite up to maybe what they could be somewhere else. The hospitality maybe not quite what it could be somewhere else. And of course, if it did move to somewhere like Saudi Arabia or even China, the prize money, I'm sure, would increase tenfold. So maybe there's an argument for if the prize money did increase at the World Championships, then all the other competitions would have to up their game, which means that it makes snooker a more kind of viable career path for a lot more people. There's a lot more money involved with it, and even, a bit like golfers, you don't have to be even within the top 128 of the world to make a really good career out of the sport. So definitely can see snooker kind of changing and evolving that way as well. But of course, it's really hard to detach, and it's really hard for me to detach myself from wanting the World Championships to stay at the Crucible Theatre. Of course, if it did move, and say, for instance, hypothetically, it did move to Saudi Arabia. Now, we know Barry Hearn is saying about wanting a 3,000 or so venue in Saudi Arabia. The problem for me with that is, okay, if he said, let's move it to China or somewhere like that, where snooker is loved by millions and millions of people, I'd say, it would still hurt me, but I wouldn't be as annoyed because I know that it's going to a place and it's going to a country where people love snooker and the crowds would feel, and people love the sport. The problem with Saudi Arabia, and we know it, and I'm not just saying this, we know that there's not a huge demand for snooker in Saudi Arabia. We saw it with the Riyadh Invitational. The crowd was, they didn't really know what was going on necessarily. Okay, there might have been some snooker fans in there, which is completely fair enough. People walking about when John Higgins is on a 167. I mean, come on. You can't have that. And how on earth does World Snooker Tour expect to fill a 3,000 capacity stadium in the early rounds of a competition when they can't even fill, a venue as small as the Riyadh Invitational venue was? So it would be a terrible look if the Worlds did move to somewhere like Saudi Arabia with a 3,000 capacity venue and only 100 people turn up. I mean, that would be awful. I don't even know how you fix that, whether there's a solution. Would they have to pay people to go and watch it? I genuinely don't know what would happen there. It's a question for another day. It does feel like a complete money grab. Like I said, it would feel more justified if the tournament was moved to somewhere like China or Germany or anywhere else in Europe or anywhere else where a country loves snooker. But I just think that people in the UK absolutely adore this sport, and it would just be such a shame for it to be moved somewhere else. We know Ronnie O'Sullivan has signed a deal with Riyadh Season, basically saying that he's going to be an ambassador for Saudi Arabia snooker. And it was really interesting to read a quote that I found from Ronnie O'Sullivan about the Crucible Theatre. Basically said that, I don't like the Crucible. I don't think that you can get in and out of it. I definitely think it's a wise decision to take the World Championships away from Sheffield. So, of course, Ronnie's an advocate for moving it from Sheffield. And it's a big thing when the best player ever is saying something like that. We know Ronnie is slightly controversial, but you do have to listen to these players as well, because they do know what they're talking about. And they go to these events in China. They go to these events in Saudi Arabia where they are looked after. They get courtesy cars. They get really well looked after. They get cooked for. It's almost like kind of more of an experience of someone like a golfer or a footballer, where there is huge amounts of money in these competitions. And fair enough, like, snooker players should try and have aspirations to be that kind of well looked after, if you like, within these competitions. But it then goes on to say, I get nice tea here, get nice lasagna at Crucible Theatre, but that's about it. You get no peace and quiet. You cannot park there. And to be fair, he is right on that. Whenever I go to Sheffield, and we usually drive because I'm not that far away from Sheffield, it's an absolute nightmare to try and get parking. It really is tricky. So obviously, if you had a dedicated venue, they'd have parking spaces, a little bit like they do, say, for instance, at Alexandra Palace. But he then goes on to say, I think Saudi Arabia will be great. They've got the resources and would do it great. If you're going to take it out to China, you'd have to take it to Shanghai. It'd be done properly. Like I said earlier, he says, goes on to say, courtesy cars, food, hotels, everything will be paid for, and the prize money will be astronomical. So, yeah, he's obviously being more of a realist there. It's such a difficult question to ask, should the Crucible be moved? And for me, no, it shouldn't be moved. Of course, the ideal situation would for it to be staying in Sheffield. I've got so much emotional attachment to that place, and you know, I wish to take my kids there one day. I'd love to be able to have the opportunity to take my kids to such a special place such as the Crucible Theatre. It's looking ever so unlikely now, but we are just going to have to wait and see. The ideal situation, of course, would be for someone like a Saudi backer or a Chinese backer to say, right, tell you what, I'm going to pay for a new venue in Sheffield. I'm going to have all the sponsoring over it. So like the Riyadh Season World Snooker Championships held in Sheffield in a massive venue. That would be the ideal situation. But I just don't think that these kind of Middle Eastern backers or these Chinese backers want that. They want the event to be in their country so they can almost own it for themselves. So leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I hope this has given you guys a little bit of something to mull over and a little bit to think about. I think you do have to think about it from both sides of the argument and play devil's advocate. Personally, I want the Crucible to stay as it is, but I just don't see that happening, and I don't see how that's viable for an ever-changing sport. And I'll leave you from this clip from Barry Hearn.
On my tombstone will not be written, "This is the man who took the World Championships away from the Crucible." It's staying, and it don't matter how much is involved. And I have never said that once in my entire life. Great days, mate. Great days.